In a small town in the west, inside a church, a fierce debate is unfolding over the local tyrant Bogue's seizure of the mines. Suddenly, a group of armed men storms in, and the sound of arguing falls silent in an instant. The man walking in is none other than the bandit leader Bogue, the one the townspeople desperately want to drive out. Soon, the thugs seize control of the scene, and the residents' earlier anger vanishes completely. However, Bogue's method of intimidation is rather unusual. He holds a bottle and keeps shaking whatever is inside, leaving everyone confused and panicked. Bogue walks slowly toward the platform, murmuring as he goes. It turns out, the bottle contains the yellow soil from under their feet, but in response to his speech, the crowd remains completely silent. Seeing this, Bogue tries another tactic to intimidate. He suddenly grabs a little boy and makes him touch the soil in the bottle, and everyone watches in fear, worried he might hurt the child. After this suffocating performance, Bogue finally gets to the point, solemnly announcing to the farmers, he's only willing to pay $20 for each piece of land, and that's his final offer. Faced with a price that's practically a giveaway, the townspeople whisper among themselves, quietly complaining it's too low, but no one dares to stand up and refuse. Bogue then orders everyone out of the church, and immediately sets the building ablaze. Just as the angry residents are about to fight back, the thugs throw out more threats, and Bogue seizes the moment to issue his final ultimatum: accept unconditionally within 3 days, or don't expect a single penny. Just as Bogue is about to leave, one fearless farmer finally steps forward. Bogue is ready to make an example out of him, not expecting someone to actually volunteer, while the farmer's wife Emma looks on, full of worry. As expected, the farmer falls, triggering a chain reaction. The furious townspeople begin to fight back, but against these ruthless criminals, the brave farmers are struck down one after another, and the entire town is soon filled with screams and fear. Bogue tells the sheriff not to remove the bodies, better to leave them out for days, as a constant warning of what happens when people resist. But then, the appearance of one man completely changes this savage western land. Dressed head to toe in black, riding a gleaming black stallion, and with dark skin to match, this mysterious figure walks into town, instantly becoming a striking sight as everyone turns to stare. Here is the vivid. Next, he planned to enter the saloon, a place known for trouble, and for a stranger like him, it was bound to turn into a bloody mess. However, Chisolm simply stood quietly at the doorway, and that alone was enough to make every cowboy inside sit up straight. As he pushed open the door, Chisolm scanned the room with his sharp eyes, quickly glancing at everyone inside. Luckily, no one looked like they were about to start a countdown. He walked over to the bar and asked for a glass of whiskey, but the bartender replied that they didn't serve that kind of drink. The spark for conflict had clearly been lit. Everyone's eyes were locked on the two of them, but Chisolm wasn't one to back down. He pulled out a coin and insisted on ordering a large glass. The bartender, realizing this man wasn't someone to mess with, quickly put on his best 5-star service attitude. Then, Chisolm pulled out $1 and asked the bartender about a man, a fugitive who looked very much like him in both build and appearance. The bartender's eyes kept darting around, occasionally glancing at a companion in the distance, who also stayed on high alert. But when Chisolm pointed out exactly where the fugitive had been shot, the bartender kept a calm face, but inside, he was in full panic mode. Finally, with Chisolm's death cue, a fight broke out. Chisolm moved with deadly precision, not a single wasted motion, and the eager cowboys around were each gunned down in seconds. Only then did the bartender realize this man was no ordinary traveler. One cowboy who hadn't even drawn his weapons still refused to give up, but Faraday, who had been casually gambling at a nearby table, suddenly stood on Chisolm's side. Chisolm took out the fugitive right then and there, and coolly told everyone to call for the sheriff. At that moment, who would dare make a move? Chisolm gave his gun a casual tap, and the terrified customers scrambled up to notify the sheriff, leaving only Faraday calmly seated. Chisolm shot a harsh glare at Faraday and walked outside. By then, the sheriff and his men had already blocked the doorway. Chisolm immediately revealed his identity, saying, "I'm a warrant officer of the Wichita court in Kansas, and also the lawman for the Indian Reservation and 7 other states. The man I just killed was a wanted fugitive under my jurisdiction." He then pulled out a bounty poster. Among the crowd watching from the sidelines was Emma, the widow of the slain farmer. While tensions flared outside, Faraday took the chance to scoop up all the gambling money from the table and quietly slipped out the back door. After Chisolm finished explaining, the sheriff finally lowered his gun, but Chisolm wasn't a cold-blooded killer. He insisted that half of the bounty go to the victim's family. With that, he turned and left in style, heading up into the mountains to hunt down his next target. Emma, seeing a glimmer of hope to defeat Bogue, rushed to stop Chisolm, pouring out the story of their town's suffering and begging him to stop Bogue from taking their land. Chisolm had already heard of the atrocities committed by the bandit leader Bogue, but he knew he couldn't take on 40 to 50 men alone, so he advised the farmers to seek help from the army. However, under Emma's more emotional and heartfelt plea, Chisolm began to waver. At this moment, a cowboy with an eastern face steps up to a duel, and instead of drawing his gun, he first takes off his hat, revealing a hairpin beneath. Then, he throws his holster to the ground. The crowd of cowboys watching is stunned, and his opponent looks completely baffled. No one expected that his ultimate weapon would turn out to be the hairpin in his hair. This eastern cowboy named Billy quickly caught Faraday's attention with his impressive skills. After all, Faraday had come here to recruit gunslingers. At that moment, Billy's companion Robichaud was busy collecting gambling winnings, but someone tried to skip out on paying until Robichaud shot him a deadly glare, and the man obediently handed over the money. The two had survived in the West using these tactics, until Faraday's arrival completely changed their situation. Not long ago, a small town had its land forcefully bought up for cheap by the local tyrant Bogue, and the desperate farmers turned to lawman Chisolm, who oversees 7 states. After a heartfelt and desperate plea, Chisolm finally agreed to help them drive Bogue out, but Chisolm knew he couldn't win alone, so he began recruiting skilled gunmen, and the first to volunteer was the gambling hustler Faraday. The two then split up to find the toughest fighters in the West. As soon as Faraday arrived at an underground fighting pit, he immediately set his sights on Billy, and began persuading him to join. Unexpectedly, Billy's partner Robichaud refused. The two were like brothers, and if Billy was joining, Robichaud had to come too. Faraday didn't see what Robichaud could offer, but in order to recruit Billy, he reluctantly agreed. Meanwhile, Chisolm ran into trouble during his own recruitment efforts. He pushed open a door, and was instantly hit by the stench of rotting corpses. Both he and Emma sensed danger. Before they could escape, Emma was suddenly lassoed by a rope. A large man with a gun appeared in front of Chisolm, who immediately raised his hands. He instantly recognized the man. This towering brute was actually someone Chisolm had previously tried to arrest, and now he was a potential recruit. Chisolm promised he wouldn't arrest him, and even offered him a share of the reward once the job was done. The two struck a deal on the spot. Soon after, Faraday returned with Billy and Robichaud to join Chisolm, but even with 5 people, they were still outmatched by Bogue's gang, so the group continued recruiting. They arrived at a wooden cabin and began asking around for a legendary figure, Jack Horn, a man who had once killed over 300 natives and was nicknamed Fat Butcher Jack. Luckily, the 2 men they questioned had just ambushed Jack and were now proudly showing off his rifle, unaware of what was coming next. A second later, an axe flew straight into one man's chest. The other cowboy was so terrified he could barely stand, stumbling backward, only to be kicked all the way home by Jack. It turned out these 2 weren't innocent. They had ambushed Jack, stolen his money, and even taken his horse. Jack had barely survived after falling off a cliff. Chisolm said they got what they deserved and didn't hold it against Jack. Instead, he advised Jack to stop scalping natives, since the government no longer paid bounties for it. Then he invited Jack to join the team, offering him a steady job at the very least. But Jack said nothing and walked away, having lost a potential powerhouse. Chisolm and the others rushed toward the town without delay. As they passed through native territory, they were quickly spotted, though the group remained unaware and had set up camp nearby. At dawn, Chisolm sensed something was off. The air was filled with the scent of blood. Suddenly, a familiar figure appeared. Jack had actually been following them the entire time. He immediately signaled that natives were nearby, and the team jumped up to look. They saw a red-faced, short-haired Native American approaching. Everyone tensed up, knowing that where there's one, there's likely more. But Chisolm warned everyone not to fire, then walked toward Red Harvest with empty hands, stating, "We're just passing through, heading to a town to punish a wicked man." After hearing this, Red Harvest immediately dropped the game from his horse, leaving everyone confused about what he was doing. Red Harvest then cut off a chunk of raw meat from the game and gestured for Chisolm to take a bite. Chisolm, holding back his disgust, reluctantly did as instructed, while the others watched in disbelief. Then, Red Harvest took a bite himself and nodded in approval. It seemed he too despised bullies and tyrants. Chisolm breathed a sigh of relief and announced that the native warrior would be joining their team. bringing their number to 7. They then rushed toward the town, with Chisolm leading the way and Billy by his side as they stormed in first instantly. Gunmen on both sides locked their sights on them. By the time Chisolm met with the sheriff, the street had already been cleared. The sheriff ordered Chisolm to hand over his revolver. Guns are now banned in this town. Chisolm politely handed over his weapon, but as the sheriff and his men looked around, 5 gunmen Chisolm's team suddenly appeared from all directions. Still, the sheriff kept his arrogant attitude. Chisolm then lashed out. "You cowards colluded with Bogue, harmed innocent farmers and women. It's time you stepped down and let us protect this town." Sensing things weren't going their way, the sheriff and his men began retreating slowly, preparing for a fight. Chisolm told them to deliver a message to Bogue. "If he wants this town, tell him to come and take it from us." With a sneer, the sheriff blew his whistle to signal his men to fire, but there was no response. Little did he know, the sniper posted on high ground had already been taken out by Red Harvest. An arrow followed swiftly, striking down a guard on the spot, and the sheriff's face finally turned serious. The battle had quietly begun. Despite being outnumbered and in a less favorable position, Chisolm's team moved swiftly and shot with deadly speed, working together like a well-oiled machine. Any enemy who showed themselves was instantly taken offline. However, Robichaud froze and couldn't bring himself to fire. The trauma from past battles had left him unable to pull the trigger, and he let one enemy escape right in front of him. In contrast, his partner Billy took out several foes in a row. When the team later reported their kill count 6-7, Robichaud remained silent. The sheriff, hiding beneath a wooden shack, trembled in fear, but Chisolm spotted him immediately. Still, Chisolm didn't finish him off. Instead, he told the sheriff to deliver a message to Bogue. "We're waiting in town, he'd better come fight us." To everyone's surprise, the sheriff actually gave a sincere warning. "Gentlemen, Bogue's gang has over 100 men. If you provoke them, none of you will survive." But Chisolm wasn't scared off. He was determined to defend the town until Bogue's gang arrived. Soon, Emma and her companion appeared in town, and she shouted to the townsfolk, "You're safe for now, these are the gunmen I hired to help drive Bogue away." Only then did the townspeople begin to step out of their homes. But just as this force had finally come together to resist Bogue, some farmers started to worry about the brutal retaliation this might bring. They harshly criticized Emma and her friend, saying it was reckless to have brought these men here. The crowd instantly fell silent. Chisolm immediately revealed his identity and said, "I'm the Marshal of 7 states, and by law, I have the duty to protect you all." At the same time, he urged the townspeople to mentally prepare themselves. "From here on out, we'll need everyone to fight alongside us." However, by the next day, some of the residents began fleeing the town. Only the braver farmers stayed behind, but all they brought were sickles and climbing hooks to show their commitment. One look at this equipment and morale, and the others couldn't help but think, how are we ever going to win like this? That night, Faraday began teaching them how to use firearms. Then Billy taught them how to throw knives. One by one, the 7 team members took turns sharing their signature skills with the farmers. Robichaud, seeing that none of them could shoot straight, erupted in frustration. But Faraday knew the truth. Robichaud himself was in worse shape than these farmers. He didn't even dare pull the trigger. Taking advantage of the tense atmosphere, Faraday handed Robichaud a gun and asked him to demonstrate for the group. Robichaud hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, and tried to dodge the request, saying, "Let's not waste the bullets." Faraday didn't let him off the hook. Instead, he started hyping him up. Robichaud once killed 23 men during the Civil War. People called him the Deadeye Gunman. "Good night, Robichaud." All that praise backed Robichaud into a corner. He looked embarrassed but had no choice. He raised the gun and took aim at the target. To everyone's surprise, not only did he fire, every bullet hit dead center. Faraday stood there awkwardly and quickly smoothed things over. Everyone trained hard with Robichaud. But that wasn't their only headache. The biggest problem was the shortage of ammunition. Soon, the 7 of them headed to the gold mines under Bogue's control. Amid explosions, they took down the guards one by one and rescued the suffering miners. They invited the miners to join their team and stand together against Bogue. At the same time, they easily acquired a stash of powerful explosives. When they returned to town, it brought a huge morale boost to the farmers. Meanwhile, in the big city, Bogue, still enjoying a life of luxury, exploded with rage when he heard the news. He thought of using money to bribe the 7 men, but the sheriff replied, "That's impossible." It seemed there was only one option left: go head to head. The sheriff instantly became Bogue's punching bag, and Bogue gave the order to recruit more gunmen and prepare to wipe out the town. Back at the town's edge, Chisolm stood firm, fully aware that the coming clash would be brutal. At dawn, Chisolm assigned sniper positions based on the unique strengths of the 6 others. He set up overlapping fire zones at every street corner and planned to use a pocket strategy to trap Bogue's gang in a deadly circle. Everything seemed perfectly laid out. Then they began building defensive fortifications. Every weapon and piece of ammunition they had was put to use, working non-stop from daylight until sunset. That night, the 6 gunmen feasted and joked around, but only Chisolm looked heavy-hearted. Still, his hard work had finally earned the respect of the townspeople. As the sun set, the town's old clock tower was restored and restarted. But just as the calm set in, Red Harvest brought news that made everyone tense. The moment had finally arrived. And yet, no one expected that at this critical moment, Robichaud would suddenly announce he was leaving. Having fought through countless battles, Robichaud knew better than anyone with just a handful of men, they stood no chance against Bogue's 100-strong force. Chisolm tried to appeal to their bond from the battlefield, urging Robichaud to stay, but Robichaud had already lost his courage and turned away from the town without looking back. This left Chisolm in a tough spot. Would more setbacks hit the team? Could he still deal a heavy blow to Bogue's gang? As the town's clock tower began to chime, the rescued townspeople immediately rushed to hide their children. In the distance, over 100 of Bogue's men lined up in formation, ready to storm the town. Even though they had professional gunmen holding the fort and well-prepared defenses, the sight of that massive army filled everyone with dread. Yet despite being outnumbered, Sheriff Chisolm rode out alone to confront the enemy, while the farmers trembling in the trenches could barely breathe. At Bogue's command, the first wave of attackers charged the town, unaware that every hidden firing point was already locked and loaded. The sound of hooves thundered through the air. Billy told his teammates to put on their masks, while another ambush squad tensed up, and the women and children hiding underground were terrified beyond words. The bandits split into 2 groups. One charged straight into the town, the other tried to flank around the miners' camp, but what they didn't know was that both routes were already rigged with traps. As the bandits entered the explosive zone, Jack immediately hit the switch. The first explosion wiped out a third of Bogue's men on the spot, sending a chill down his spine. The survivors pressed forward, only to be met by counterattacks from the townspeople. Using preset traps, the farmers took down another wave with ease, but traps alone couldn't win the war once those were used up. They had to fight face to face. Some picked up shovels, others fought with bare hands, and chaos erupted across the battlefield. One farmer peeked out from the trench and managed to take a bandit by surprise, but the enemy's numbers and experience soon overwhelmed the defenses, and some of them broke through into the town. Chisolm rushed to the front line, taking the fight head-on. Thanks to his expert riding and sharpshooting, he made it through the first wave unscathed. Still, the pressure remained high as the first defensive line fell. They quickly retreated to the second. Faraday was the first to fire the cannon, giving their warm welcome. Then the brutal street fighting began. The farmers, lacking experience and afraid for their lives, suffered heavy losses. Both sides gave it their all, sparing nothing in their fight to the death. The Magnificent Seven constantly found themselves in outnumbered brawls. At one point, Faraday was hit by a bullet. His teammates reacted instantly, rushing out and gunning down the officer who fired the shot. Faraday reached for his wound. Luckily, it wasn't critical and he jumped right back into the battle. Slowly, the tide began to turn in favor of the town, just as the townspeople were finishing off enemy after enemy. Bogue, watching from afar, realized things were going south and finally revealed his trump card. No one saw it coming until Robichaud, who had left the night before, returned to the battlefield and shouted to his teammates, "There's a Gatling gun outside." Only then did everyone realize the new danger. A one-eyed bandit immediately ordered the gun to fire. Bullets rained down on the town like a storm. Bogue didn't care about friendly fire. He was determined to wipe out every last person in the town. Gunfire in the town came to a sudden stop. Everyone scrambled for cover. The bullets were so intense that no one dared lift their head. After the initial wave of gunfire, the bandits immediately began reloading. In that brief moment of silence, Jack was suddenly shot by a native warrior on the enemy's side. Jack, who had always hated Native Americans, didn't fall right away. He pushed through the pain and staggered toward his attacker, but he hadn't gone far when several more arrows struck him, killing him on the spot. In that moment, he brought a perfect end to the bloody sins of his past. The man who once scalped natives now met his fate at their hands. Seeing how devastating the enemy's Gatling gun was, Chisolm quickly ordered the evacuation of women and children to a safer location. That's when the enemy's native fighters spotted Emma. Emma, terrified, kept pulling the trigger, but her gun was already out of bullets. Just as she was about to give in to despair, Red Harvest stepped forward. He didn't hesitate against a traitor from his own people. With swift, precise moves, Red Harvest took out the enemy warrior with a single strike. Once Bogue's men finished reloading, the Gatling gun roared to life again. At this rate, even more lives would be lost. And sure enough, Billy and Robichaud, once the perfect duo, were the next to fall under the relentless fire. At that critical moment, Faraday stepped up. He asked Chisolm to cover him, then mounted a horse and charged straight into the hail of bullets. Bandits chased close behind. Despite being shot multiple times, Faraday pressed on with sheer willpower. But he wasn't some invincible superhero, just a man of flesh and blood. He eventually collapsed in front of Bogue and his men. Even the enemy was stunned by his unbreakable spirit. As he lay dying, Faraday reached for one final cigarette, but his hands were too weak to light a match. Seeing this, the one-eyed bandit lit the cigarette for him. Just as he turned to finish Faraday off, Faraday collapsed completely, leaving the outlaws murmuring in awe. But when they looked back down, they realized Faraday had lit the fuse of the bomb hidden in his coat. With that, the threat of the Gatling gun was wiped out. Bogue had no choice but to lead his men personally to clean up the mess. But just as he sent two men into a building, the sound of gunshots rang out. His top man dropped dead without warning. Then, out walked one man, the multi-state marshal, Chisolm. He and Bogue faced off in the middle of a town littered with corpses. Chisolm had the upper hand the whole time, keeping Bogue from ever reaching his gun. Finally, Bogue dropped his arrogant act and began to beg for mercy. Chisolm forced him toward the church, right up to the foot of the cross, demanding that he pray for the souls of the dead. Bogue couldn't understand it. For these sheep, are they really worth all this? Chisolm, seething with rage, revealed a painful truth. My mother was violated by your men. My two sisters died because of you. If I hadn't escaped with my life back then, we wouldn't even be standing here. Only then did Bogue begin to recall, but it was far too late. As Chisolm forced him to repent, he began choking him, slowly sending him to hell. But Bogue still had one trick left. He struggled to pull a small pistol from his boot. Before he could even pull the trigger, Emma burst in and shot him dead on the spot. And so, the ruthless tyrant who had terrorized the West finally met his end. Of the 7 warriors, only 3 survived, a fact that filled Chisolm with deep guilt. In the end, the 4 fallen fighters were buried with honor. Chisolm, along with Red Harvest and Emma, continued their mission to bring justice to the untamed lands of the West. And with that, the film comes to an end. I'm a movie enthusiast. Thanks for watching. See you next time.